All right, so we are at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for everybody that has joined us. We're excited to have a wonderful group of panelists today talking about the amazing work that they're doing to advance community co-benefits in clean energy. So my name is Phoebe Rometto, and I am the equity manager of the Beyond the Megawatt initiative, which is part of the Clean Energy Buyers Institute. We'll give a little bit more background for those of you who are not familiar with our organization or initiative here shortly. All right, so for today, we are really going to tap into the expertise of our panelists and learn about why co-created social benefits are important in clean energy development, what mechanisms have been applied by some of our industry stakeholders, and how that can help drive impact towards your goal. So we'll start off again with an overview of what Beyond the Megawatt is, what CEBI and CEBI are, and then provide a brief high-level overview of what our co-benefits primer has in store. We will link to the primer and send this out to everybody via email as well, so you can dive deeper into all of the topic areas. Then we'll move into our panelist discussion and then leave some time for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit your questions throughout as they come up, and we'll get to as many as we can here at the end. All right, so to provide an introduction to CEBI. So CEBI can stand for Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, which is the partnership between two different organizations, which is the association that is a trade association that activates a community of energy customers and their partners to deploy market and policy solutions to advance carbon-free energy. The Clean Energy Buyers Institute, which is what houses our Beyond the Megawatt initiative, is a public good organization that's focused on looking at solving market challenges and is not necessarily tied to our membership, but they are both very collaborative and tied together. Our main role here is to convene different stakeholders, educate our community, build enabling tools, and find ways to showcase the work that our partners are doing. And lastly, we also have a policy team that advocates on tackling some of the barriers to advancing clean energy, such as transmission and other regulatory challenges. So to Beyond the Megawatt. So Beyond the Megawatt is an initiative that was really driven by our stakeholders, mainly corporate energy customers, and we have a really strong network of developers and service providers as well. And the goal here is to advance an energy transition that is resilient, equitable, and environmentally sustainable. We know that clean energy work isn't necessarily, not harmful. And so we understand the importance of ensuring that it is community-led, that we look at issues like circularity, and that we also recognize that in a changing climate, resilience is more important than ever. So our process here is to, we're about a year old, and we've been taking time to listen to our stakeholders and understand the impacts of clean energy. We're in the process of creating enabling tools. So we have some procurement guidance, a due diligence network framework in process. And our goal with that is to then broaden awareness of the best practices and then eventually change this to be the market norm. And so, again, we recognize that a just transition is incredibly important and that we need to both prevent harm and promote co-benefits for communities. Next, we have environmental. So we recently launched what we call the Principles for Purpose-Driven Energy Procurement. I'm leaving this QR code here so that you can pull up your phone and it'll link directly to it. Our principles are based off of the three topic areas that Beyond the Megawatt focuses on. That's sustainability, resilience, and social equity. Right now, we have 20 signatories to our principles, and we are looking to expand to that. The more companies that sign on, the more that we can send a market signal that says that this is important to our stakeholders and to the players of the clean energy industry. And we know that the voluntary market has been very influential in driving clean energy. And so these types of efforts really do make a difference. And you can read a little bit, about what this means, really looking at biodiversity, really looking at adaptive capacity, and then lastly, ensuring that these projects are community driven. So now I'll proceed to go over our co-benefits primer, which again, we will link, and we will also share with you in a follow-up email. So we wanted to, first make sure that we provided a framework to get started on assessing your readiness, right? Doing social equity work, social justice work really comes down to first, doing a self-assessment to see where you're at. So how does this work align with your internal goals? Leadership support, do you have it? If not, how can you acquire it? And again, do you have the available resources and capacity to do this type of work? Community engagement is incredibly important. Evaluation of how this work is doing is incredibly important, and it does require the commitment to dedicate those resources and capacity. For energy providers or developers and customers, there's also a really strong opportunity, again, to look at community engagement, but to also look at how siting can advance co-benefits directly. The Inflation Reduction Act does a really, really propels this by providing additional incentives on energy communities, tribal lands, low-income communities, and so we really do see that as an important opportunity to advance social benefits. On the right, we have a photo of a Rivian TNC and Bright Night Starfire coal mine redevelopment that will be taking place. And so we're starting to see, our stakeholders also moving forward to these types of projects. All right, and so another thing that the primer touches on is the mechanisms that we've seen that are being used to promote co-benefits. Many of you may have already heard of community workforce agreements, community benefits agreements, but there's also an emergence of using funds from clean energy projects to advance and fund community impact funds. And those funds can then be used to promote many of the co-benefits that we discuss. We also wanted to highlight that, many corporate buyers are engaging in utility scale solar, but by supporting getting RECs from distributed generation or community solar, there's also an opportunity to advance that access to clean energy for communities. So we know that there are a lot of different types of co-benefits, but we highlighted 3 key areas. The first is economic inclusion, and that really encompasses everything from ensuring that you have equitable workforce development to helping advance education and what we call building the pipeline, ensuring that you're working with communities to have students, already be ready to take on different pathways for clean energy careers from the high school level. Entrepreneurship and supplier diversity, so everything from programs that support entrepreneurs that are historically underrepresented to ensuring that you are also supporting underrepresented businesses within your supply chain. Community wealth building is another aspect that we've heard quite a bit. What are the mechanisms that, aside from job creation, that communities can benefit from these projects? Second, we go over energy equity. So again, thinking about clean energy access, and either, there's ways to have distributed generation where you provide projects that directly allow that green access on clean energy access on site. We know that that's not feasible for all. So community solar is another great opportunity where corporates can be an anchor tenant for a community solar project. We've seen bill credit donations also take place from different projects. And so something that you'll see in the primer is not just discussing the types of opportunities, but we also have tables throughout each section that note different organizations that are working on these topic areas and project examples. Energy burden is another opportunity area here. Finding ways to engage in repairs, pre-weatherization, weatherization, energy efficiency, electrification, or again, the bill credit donation that reduces the cost that families allocate to electricity and energy. Here on the right, you'll also see the Sunnyside community solar project that was done in partnership with the city of Houston and Solar United Neighbors. That was actually a landfill. This is a rendering, but it's a former landfill that is now going to be a solar farm. So again, looking at the siting and the health impacts of something like this that has multiple co-benefits. We also, again, recognize that while we have been driving a lot of efforts towards climate mitigation, adaptation and resilience work is becoming more and more important as we see unforeseen effects of climate. And so some of the aspects of microgrids have been translated into resilience hubs, which are community centers that can provide backup power, oftentimes backup water, and perhaps other community services such as food distribution to communities that may be affected by disruption in power or water access. And so these are resilience hubs, and we have seen corporates start to fund these through, the community impact fund mechanisms that we discussed earlier. Resilient infrastructure recognizes that, redlining in the United States has led to inequitable infrastructure. And so everything from, stormwater infrastructure to urban heat island, right, and increasing the level of green infrastructure that can help communities is all part of really thinking about that aspect. Lastly, we did want to call out community capacity, and this is really centered on the idea that grassroots environmental justice organizations that are place-based are more connected to their communities than others and are also highly underfunded in comparison to large, big green organizations. And so funding environmental justice organizations directly that are community-led and community-centered and have those community connections is another great opportunity to help, balance out that funding disparity. Lastly, we do include a section on a global outlook. And so most of the corporate procurement that we see is in the global north, in North America and Europe. But we also understand that in order to drive global decarbonization efforts, this needs to be expanded all across the world. And so there are some great organizations that are working on this, and we highlight some of the initiatives and some of the organizations working on this, and really just want for corporate energy customers and anybody that's working in this issue to recognize the social equity opportunity of expanding this work globally. We'll end here with a call to action before we go to our panelists, and that's just to say that it's important to align your why with your company mission. Many organizations have DEI statements or have a philanthropy wing or something that's rooted in corporate social responsibility, and finding that alignment will really help build your case for advancing this work. Focusing on the opportunities and not barriers. We know that there are barriers that exist to this work that make it harder, but by focusing on the opportunities and everything good that can come from what we see as an imperative to have a social license to operate in communities, can really help drive that work forward. And then lastly, this work is never easy. Doing environmental justice work, DEI focused work can be really challenging. And so we do encourage for you to act courageously and creatively. A lot of what we've seen out in the market is brand new. We're seeing a lot of folks trying something for the first time and then gaining and sharing lessons learned from that. And so it's important to think creatively, and just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done and it can't be successful. And so today I'm also very excited because we have some amazing panelists that are going to be joining us and really talking about their own experience. So we've got Yinka Bode-George from Sustain Our Future, Marcus Krems from Enel North America, Sanu Luigi from Google, and Melanie Santiago-Mosier from the Nature Conservancy. I am actually going to let them introduce themselves and provide a my initial question, which is first introduce yourself, your role, but then also share with us your why. Why did you decide to get involved in social equity work and environmental justice work? And yeah, we can go from there. And so I will stop sharing my screen and we'll go in this order. So Yinka, Marcus, Sana, and then Melanie. Thank you all so much.
Okay, I will get us started. And Phoebe, thank you so much for that overview. And thank you to the CEBI group for convening this session. I'm really excited to dig in with my co-panelists. This is a really exciting conversation. So my name is Yinka Bode-George. Hello, everyone. I'm the CEO and founder of Sustain Our Future Foundation. I'm an environmental public health scientist by training. And actually, before I dive into what Sustain Our Future is, I would like to just take a second to ground us in what environmental justice is. And I think having a shared language is just better for having dialogues like this. So I'll give my quick version of environmental justice, what it means to me. So to really understand environmental justice, I think you have to understand environmental health first, right? So environmental health factors include things like where you eat, sleep, play, pray, how you access those things. And because, our communities, due to systems of inequity, are not set up equitably, we know that there are communities that experience environmental health factors in sort of unhealthy manners and communities that can experience environmental health factors in healthy manners. What environmental justice means is regardless of your social identity, the color of your skin, where you live, everyone deserves access to healthy environmental health factors. So that's a quick version of environmental justice just to ground us. And so me and Sustain Our Future. So I was actually, I've had an environmental health and justice, grassroots organizing and policy advocacy background and career, and really cultivated a career doing that work. And it ended up with me joining one of the two solar firms that was recruited by Microsoft to pilot the first environmental justice power purchase agreement. And so this idea is really just leveraging renewable energy procurement processes to really create direct financial benefits to frontline community members, so communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. And if you're not familiar with the EJPPA, I can drop the report that we wrote with Microsoft in the chat, or Phoebe, if you have it handy, I welcome you to do that. And so I created Sustain Our Future Foundation, which is a national nonprofit organization, to scale this premise of redistributing critical dollars to community members on the front lines of the climate crisis. So our mission is to transform sustainable development to maximize positive community impact and achieve environmental justice. And we do this through consulting services and social impact. So to Phoebe's question, why did I embark on this social equity centered work? For me, it's really important to understand that the root cause of the climate crisis is environmental injustice, and the same systems that really proliferate environmental inequities, through the creation of sacrifice zones, gave rise to the climate crisis. So as we're ushering in this sustainability renaissance, I think it's really critical to heal this deep legacy of environmental justice while creating a more sustainable future. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. So I'm really excited to dig into how they're not mutually exclusive with my co-panelists. And again, it's great to be here.
Wonderful. Marcus, you're next.
Sure. Thank you to the CEBI group and to all of our participants today. Likewise, it's a real pleasure to be here on this webinar and representing the developer perspective, and look forward to our conversation here in a little bit. But firstly, wanted to share a little bit about myself, my role, and what has driven me to choose a career in driving social equity centered work. And for me, firstly, it's driven by impact. It's industrial impact, it's environmental impact, social, and increasingly and primarily community centered impact. Those testimonials that my team and I, and that we observe from other peer companies and stakeholders, from landowners, from businesses, students and educators, and lawmakers, all really fuel my individual motivation, and like to see their stories influencing behaviors, and influencing policies around the U.S. and elsewhere. And of course, customers and corporate procurement officials and influencers have a very significant role to play too in driving social equity focused outcomes. And how we measure those outcomes, CEBI is really driving that narrative forward as well, along with a handful of other conveners. So really, really excited about how we measure the work that we're looking to do, and how we assess what we mean by social performance and social impact. I've worked for Enel now, going on my 8-year anniversary this August. I've worked for roughly 20 years in various progressive roles across the full energy value chain, in renewables and non-renewables. For the last 8 years, I've led the sustainability and community affairs team within Enel North America, which in the US is a top 5 owner operator, and globally the largest private operator of renewable energy and infrastructure networks, distribution networks. Within Enel, we've had for several years a commitment to creating shared value. And this CSV, or shared value approach, really uses the business as a force for driving societal good as business opportunities. And through that, increasing our own competitiveness and social impact. So that mutual benefit between addressing societal opportunities and issues as a core business opportunity, is a mutually reinforcing principle and set of characteristics that we've had executive and full buy-in and support from our colleagues across the organization. Really enjoy Yinka's comment about the sustainability and clean energy, I would add, renaissance that we are all experiencing. So I'll hand it over to my co-panelists to describe their perspectives, but really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Hi, everyone. I'm Sana Oji, and I'm a transaction lead for Google's energy team. I have also had the pleasure of leading our energy equity work over the past 3 years. Here at Google, my background is actually mostly on the developer side. I came to Google from renewable development companies, and prior to that, I worked on energy policy. So for the past, almost 14, 15 years, I've seen it from different angles. And I think what has always been very evident to me is whether you're working on policy or actual projects, infrastructure, or you're a customer, the real on-the-ground impact is really what drives the success or failure of those projects or initiatives. And so it just makes the most sense to make sure that the communities that are either supposed to benefit or, as my co-panelist was noting, have been subject to the most level of impacts from climate change, are kind of brought along on this journey as we try to transition into a clean energy sector, and hopefully try to mitigate some of the historical, unfortunate impacts that we've had, both on communities, but also on our climate. I'm really also excited to be part of this panel. It's been great to work with Phoebe and the CEBI team in general. And I think the conversation we're having around the standardization, quantification, is really critical to our ability to be able to expand these programs and make them available to other corporates and other like-minded partners across the country. So I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled to be on this panel with some amazing colleagues in this space. Phoebe and CEBI, thank you so much for the invitation and congratulations for the launch of your co-benefits primer. It is amazing. It's awesome to be able to participate in the Beyond the Megawatt initiative at CEBI. So yeah, hi everybody. My name is Melanie Santiago Mosier. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as the Equitable Energy Transition Advisor for the Nature Conservancy's Global Renewable Energy Team. The Nature Conservancy is a global environmental nonprofit, and we're working to create a world where people and nature thrive. One of the core pillars in our approach to tackling climate change is the acceleration of an equitable renewable energy transition that advances goals for climate, conservation, and communities. We like to call that our 3 Cs. So in my day job, I'm really privileged to work with TNC's teams to ensure that the transition to renewable energy is an equitable one. I've been working on this, clean energy policy and clean energy regulation for about 15 years. And I've been privileged to be able to focus on energy equity for about the last 7 years. So after graduating from law school, I worked on clean energy policy and did regulatory work in government and for-profit companies. And I did that for about 8 years. But I joined the nonprofit sector about 7 years ago when I knew it was time to make a change and have a deeper impact. When I transitioned to the nonprofit sector, I built the Access and Equity program at Vote Solar, and I worked there for over 5 years. And I've supported energy equity efforts in some other organizations as well. This time of being really focused on energy equity and justice has been a time of really deep learning and humility. And it's just been really fulfilling to help support work with a variety of partners to support and advance just energy solutions. This work is important to me for a couple of reasons. So first of all, from a personal perspective, I grew up in a mobile home in northern Utah, and winters there are very, very cold. So in our trailer, energy efficiency, or actually the lack of energy efficiency, had a real impact, as did our lack of access to other bill-saving measures like solar. So I remember when it would be really, really cold on winter's morning, we would wake up and there would literally be a sheet of ice on the inside of our door. It was that cold and it was that inefficient. And so I think back to how my mom worked 2 jobs, often to pay our high bills to keep us safe and to keep us healthy in our home. Also, I'm a Latina in this climate and clean energy space. And really, there is a demon called imposter syndrome, and that demon is very, very loud some days. Even though I've been involved in clean energy advocacy for well over a decade, and I've been working to build policies and programs that have provided the underpinnings for the growth of this industry, it's really been a time of isolation for a lot of it. This movement's been very homogenous for a very long time, and it's only recently starting to change. So when I was growing up, I never saw myself in this type of field and this kind of position. And I'm guessing that a lot of other little girls of color don't as well. So I think that it's important to be in this space to say, hey, we all can show up and be part of the solution. And I think about my dad. So I grew up in northern Utah. My dad worked on oil rigs as a driller. That work kept him away from home for weeks at a time. So his work was extractive of the land and the communities around that land. His work was extractive of our families because he wasn't around much. And yet we still relied on that work to be able to eat and to be able to have a roof over our head. So I carry this interesting tension, right? And wanting to honor people who have worked in the industry and the energy industry to date, but knowing that we need to create a really fair and equitable pathway forward. I've also been privileged to work with an amazing nonprofit group called Grid Alternatives, and do volunteer installations with them and work on policy with them. And so I've seen firsthand that clean energy really can bring serious concrete benefits to communities and families who otherwise have been left behind. And so I like I have a lot of reasons for why I'm in this work, but it's really exciting to be here with this panel and talk about how we can take our whys and go forward to the hows and the what. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for sharing that powerful background story. I think we all have, that life experience and the lived experience that drives this work. Thank you all so much for sharing. So one, question that I think a lot of folks have, because many of you have started to implement this work and have been successful in implementing this work, is what are some lessons learned that you want to share with the audience? Again, we have a mix of corporate, government, and NGOs that are here present with us. So what do you think are some of the lessons learned that you'd like to share? And what are some opportunities that you think folks, in different types of industries, maybe similar to yours, based off of your specific experience, have? And so we'll start with Sana on this one. Take it away.
Thank you. So I just want to kind of reiterate a point that Melanie made. I'm sorry for my background, our lights automated sometimes, so I'll be dark in a second. Melanie talked about, I think, humility. I think for us, that was one of the reasons that it probably took us so long, because we really had to fight back against our tendency as a group of, mostly honestly eager and excited to, work hard and contribute, but to take a step back and say, let's actually hear from the community and find out what it is that they need and what is that they are struggling with. So we spent about a year on a sort of a listening tour. We commissioned surveys. We did hundreds of interviews with local organizations, community leaders, local policymakers to try to understand what the communities where we have data centers were actually struggling with and what was at the top of their mind, right? And trying to sort of take that feedback and have it be our sort of north light for whatever solution or models we're going to introduce going forward. So I think, and frankly, we've introduced a series of models to date. Remains to be seen how successful they are and how many of them actually succeed, right? But I think what we feel really good about is the way that we went about introducing it and keeping the community need center of the whole program. The biggest, outside of that, the biggest lesson learned for me was that it's critical to share lessons learned more broadly. I can't tell you how much we learned from the work of other corporates. I mean, thank you, Yinka, to you and Microsoft and all the partners that came together and took a risk by introducing what you were doing early on. We learned a lot from it. We learned a lot from the work and research that Salesforce was doing. I think there's a bit of it's a tension, right? Especially as large corporations, I think we're historically very resistant to putting ideas out there that might not be perfect. But I think if we approach it from a sense that all of us are learning in this on this topic, right? There's so many opportunities, so many, unfortunately, problems to tackle, and not a silver bullet, right? So to the extent that we can learn from each other's experiences and be open to kind of hearing what each of us has learned through their own work, I think that's critical to identifying what each organization's kind of mission fit is with what their community's needs are.
I'll go ahead and add to that, Sana. So I really like what you shared around the listening tour that Google commissioned and participated in, the hundreds of surveys and feedback loops that you received across the US and possibly elsewhere. One of the main lessons learned that I would like to share is reinforcing that as well, which is starting early in the site selection, siting, and early development process. And we do conduct project level materiality assessments, which do in effect create that that overlap between the priorities of the community and the priorities of the company. And where those exist, we really try to emphasize and reinforce those. Oftentimes that lands in the realm of workforce development, education, local infrastructure improvement, resilient communities. Those are some of the common themes that we see oftentimes appear as priorities of the community that are also priorities of the company. But having that input from corporates and from energy purchasers as a developer is crucial and increasingly important. So that early disclosure, or that early intervention from the demand side to the supply side can really help maximize and create the type of collective impact that I believe we are all here today on this webinar seeking to manifest as the outcomes of our business and other organizational priorities. So I guess in effect, really starting early in a partnership type of mindset between the community, the developer, and potentially other partners, suppliers, or off-takers are really, really important, so that that combination has a multiplier effect into the outcomes realized by that project, not just low-cost, reliable electricity, but the co-benefits that we're talking about realizing here today.
I'd like to add on with just a couple of things, because Marcus and Sana are absolutely right. It's really important to start early and often with community engagement. To Yinka's point earlier about this being really related to environmental justice, one of the core root causes of those injustices is that communities were deliberately excluded from the opportunity to have a say in what they wanted their communities to look like and be like. It was like deliberate decisions were made to make sure that marginalized communities did not have a voice. And so going forward, just from a perspective of doing the right thing, it's really important to apply that same level of intentionality to making sure those communities do today have the opportunity to say, these are our priorities. This is what we need. This is what we want our community to be like. And let's work together to see how we can address all those priorities together. But from there, going into the house, I wanted to point out that CEBI's new co-benefits primer has some really, really awesome tips and really nice resources in it for how to do that community engagement really thoughtfully. And I really I can't applaud you guys enough for how you've put this guide together. There are a couple of phrases that I'm going to steal from other people that I've heard recently. So Margot Brown is the environmental justice lead for EDF, and she's talked about radical listening. And there is an environmental anthropologist within the Nature Conservancy whom I haven't yet met, but I've heard about her and she sounds amazing. Her name is Liz Vandola, and she has a phrase that she calls deep hanging out. This is how you start with the community engagement. It's not rocket science, but it does take time to listen and really, really hear what communities are saying. And the way you do it is by deep hanging out. You go have coffee with community leaders, you go have lunch, you go just, build relationships. That's the way to start this. I think, I don't want to minimize the amount of time and effort and possibly financial investment it takes to actually engage in that way. But I would encourage everyone not to overthink it, because it's just the same way you would go build relationships with your colleagues in the business community, build those relationships, build that trust. But no, it's going to take a little bit of time.
I'm just going to continue on the community engagement train. But first I'll say, what we're talking about is really the goal of sustainability and sustainable development is environmental justice, right? So if we're doing sustainable development effectively, we will succeed when environmental justice is done effectively. And so to achieve this, I think we have to lean into the idea of business not as usual. Because to my earlier point, business as usual has led to the existence of sacrifice zones, right? And as everyone's been saying, you know, the same community members being relegated into these positions of marginality. So it's so important to recognize that as we're endeavoring on these projects, these development projects, they're massively transforming our landscapes. Let's remember, these are people's homes, these are people's neighborhoods. And as much as community members want cleaner energy, the way those projects are developed matters. And so when we talk about authentic community engagement and the importance of it, it's really the cornerstone of this work. And I think companies have to really seriously center community engagement at the strategy levels of their companies, right? It's not just a nice to have, right? Like, it's great moral good, but it's not just that. It actually is the key and the success of developing projects. And I'm sure Marcus can talk more about, you know, what on the developer side, what folks are seeing. You know, it's so important to lead with community engagement, because you can actually complete your projects when you have effective partnerships with communities. And so to that point as well, let's also lean into leveraging new and unconventional partnerships and expertise, both, you know, within community, but also within new and different organizations. Like, it's okay if you're not an environmental justice expert or you're not a community engagement expert. While you're building your analysis around environmental justice and community engagement, you can actually identify the people and the organizations who are expert in those things and work together. I think Sana brought up such a good point about just leaning into the strength of an ecosystem of partnerships, right? We should not be doing this work in silos. We're all in this together. And it really truly doesn't matter who does what first, right? Because the climate and our communities do not care who does what first. So let's break down those silos and really build off of each other's innovations as well. I think partnership, community collaboration, that is really the key here.
Thank you so much. So we are approaching getting into the audience Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please pop them in so that we can get ready for those questions from you. So I know each of you has had the opportunity to work on, you know, implementing this work directly with projects. And so, you know, for folks that, you know, go and read our primer, plug again, which we'll link to shortly here, they'll learn a little bit more. But I know that there are some recent projects that have been announced from all of your ends. And so if all of you would like to talk a little bit about some projects that you've worked on that you'd like to highlight for the audience that you think helped embody a lot of these principles that you have mentioned, please share. And if anybody wants to go first, we can popcorn style it. So Melanie, I see.
I'll start, since one of the slides that you showed actually highlighted this project that we just announced, which is super exciting. So 3 weeks ago, I got the opportunity to visit southeastern Kentucky for the public announcement of a project that came to light through a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, Rivian, and a solar energy developer called Bright Night Power. This really came about because the Nature Conservancy and Rivian worked together on a white paper and a toolkit called Power with Purpose, which really tries to highlight and dive into the 3 C's that we seek to advance in this work. And it's really a lot of what's behind the meter or beyond the meter initiative. It's conservation, climate, and communities. And so this project really kind of rose to the top for meeting Rivian and Nature Conservancy's goals. The project is at completion will be about 800 megawatts, which is a very large project. It'll be on approximately 250,000 acres of former mine land in southeastern Kentucky. This is one of the largest former mines in the entire state of Kentucky. It's really an amazing project here. So this project has the potential to invest $1 billion into that region of Appalachia. In doing that investment, Bright Rivian, and TNC are working together on how this project can advance conservation, so be built in a way that is responsible, connecting precious lands, connecting migratory pathways for different kinds of animals and wildlife. By its very nature, it will be advancing goals for climate. But really, one of the things that made this project come to the top was that Bright Power and Rivian and TNC are really invested in making sure that the community is centered in how this project goes forward and how benefits are shared. This is a region of Appalachia that a year ago suffered devastating floods. And so some of the things that are under consideration are how to support housing for people who lost their homes in floods, how to support community impact funds, how to support workforce development, and a lot of other just amazing things. There's amazing possibilities with this project that really go along with some of the things that are outlined in the co-benefits primer. So thank you for the opportunity to highlight the project.
I could add a couple quick examples here before we dive into Q&A. The first I'd like to highlight is a community scale resilience project, a microgrid, in fact, in Puerto Rico that was originated as a portfolio of community scale resilience projects by RMI and the Rockefeller Foundation, which is now branding or modeling this as the global energy alliance for people and planet. So I would encourage you to look it up, and I can drop a link in the chat. But stemming from our executing a partnership for behind the meter microgrids with a large corporate, in fact, one of the largest employers on the island, we took a very intentional approach to addressing community scale resilience, given the hurricane prone nature and the recent disasters that had occurred there. Natural disasters. And so through that partnership with RMI and the then Rockefeller Foundation, we provided philanthropic capital and other engineering in kind services that then resulted in the deployment of these community scale microgrids in several locations, although our support focused on one near the industrial client of ours. So that's one, opportunity where we were asking the questions early in the partnership on what were the needs and opportunities at the community scale. And it turned out that there was, through the RMI Islands Energy Program, a very robust set of opportunities that were effectively shovel ready, but they needed partnerships, dollars, and expertise. And we were well positioned and timed well to provide all of those for the partners. The second would be more on the utility scale side, and it's through a partnership with McDonald's and a handful of their logistics partners that wrote into their offtake agreement commitments for undertaking certain social investments and other environmental performance characteristics of a utility scale solar project. So we really want to applaud McDonald's and their partners and advisors for convening that very complex deal that embedded into those deal terms both the social investment and environmental performance aspects, and look forward to sharing more about that in the months ahead.
Do we want to jump into questions, or do we? I'm happy to go next if you have time.
We haven't gotten any, so if you want to highlight a project and Ginka highlight as well, we can keep going with that.
Sounds good. So we a couple of months ago announced, I think, 2 different but very similar projects. One is our partnership with Soul Systems to create a community investment funds in South Carolina and North Carolina. I think for us, Soul System has been an excellent thought partner and honestly a driving force in helping us think through these issues critically. So big shout out to them. We are very excited on the pre-weatherization investment fund that we have with them going on, and we'll be expanding on that. In fact, we included that component in our subsequent deal, which I will talk about with EDPR. But I think What is really interesting is we were able, along with them, to identify this gap in funding for low-income households. There's a lot of federal, state funding available for energy efficiency upgrades, for weatherization upgrades, but not all homes qualify, and there's very limited funding for those homes that don't qualify, right, to be able to come to this standard that can then subsequently be able to access those additional funds. So we're excited to build on that program. The second one is our partnership with EDPR, which also has a community investment component, but is also primarily centered around how we address energy burden in short term. And that will look like, take a look at a bill credit on low middle income customers' electricity bill. I think we really try to build on our opportunity to be in a deregulated market on that one. So it's going to take us a little more thinking on how we restructure that model for regulated markets. But it was definitely a big leap of faith by both us and the EDPR organization. So massive kudos to them. They really came to the table with the same level of intention and mission. And I think that's also critical when trying to do these kind of collaborations, is finding partners that are like-minded and are willing to put skin into the game. They capped their returns, to be able to ensure that the upside from the project continues to flow to the community. Massive kudos to them on that. And they agreed to work with us to cite at least 1/3 of the projects in communities that were also low middle income, so that they could benefit from the tax revenue that the projects bring along with them. So hopefully, as we kind of advance these two deals, we can share more with everybody.
And before we jump into Q&A, I'll just mention quickly the work that we're endeavoring on. So Sustain Our Future Foundation functions as a community investment fund. So we can partner with buyers and developers to receive dollars to then push out into community. And one thing I'll say, the nature of the climate crisis is multifaceted. We've talked a lot about environmental injustices. So therefore, our program strategy is really multifaceted. We're creating workforce development programs centered around people who are underrepresented in sustainability, to really pipeline them into critical roles in sustainability. Grants to environmental justice organizations, the grassroots folks who are doing critical policy work and community organizing work. Also seeding the existence and supporting and resourcing entrepreneurs who are also underrepresented in sustainability and renewable energy, making sure that we have the vendors, we have the developers who can then work and partner with buyers, right, who are underrepresented. And then, infrastructure projects for low and middle income community members as well. These are all part of our program strategy, making sure that we're tackling issues from all different fronts. That's us. And I would love to get into the questions that we see in the chat.
So we've gotten a four so far in. The first is, what advice do you have for students, college students who are looking to get into the environmental justice field?
I can start. My advice is to find an organization that you feel passionate about, whether it's on the advocacy side or the development side, and just commit at least 3 years of your time to learn. I think one thing that is very common, and I actually made the same mistake when I was out of college myself, is jumping on from careers. But the reality of it is, you really don't build depth and knowledge until you've been in a role for at least 12 to 24 months, right? So if you're keen about learning, just find an organization you feel passionate about and try to get involved. I think to the extent that those communities or those organizations work with communities on the ground, even better, because there's no experience that can parallel being on the field, right? So that's probably my advice.
And the advice I would give, I'm constantly talking to college students, actually, especially college students of color who are trying to figure out, how do I get into the space? What does a career look like? I think building your environmental justice analysis is my #1 tip. Do the readings, study movements, and really build a critical analysis on environmental justice. It is so important, regardless of what company you work for, what industry, to have that analysis and maintain it so that you can be a disruptor, right? You can really be doing effective environmental justice work. So that is my #1 tip. Read all of the books, study all of the justice advocates, the work that they have done to really build a critical analysis.
I would add on 1 or 2 things. So first, I completely agree with that. Really do that analysis and internalize it and visit the communities. There's nothing like seeing firsthand the impact of pollution, the impact of degradation on real people in real time, but also to see how resilient and strong they are and how important it is to make sure that their leadership is being centered in the work. And then I'd say, I say this to everybody, there's a role for everybody in this work. So if you are a numbers person, if you like spreadsheets, if you're a policy person, if you're a communicator, if you're somebody who likes to have systems and organize things, we need all of you in this work. So think about what you like to do on a daily basis. You can do that and support environmental justice.
I love that. And oh, I'm sorry,
I was just going to add one quick comment for the individual or for folks re-listening to the webinar that are interested in breaking into local organizations. I'm certain that I can speak on behalf of all the panelists that we're very happy to serve as connectors and networkers, or networking on behalf of those individuals who are motivated to be connected with local organizations or nationally or internationally focused organizations for that matter. So don't be hesitant to reach out, connect with us, and connect with others. So just be confident and take that step, which might seem a bit scary. And then if not, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to various citizen scientist apps. So you don't even have to leave your home to be able to contribute to air quality monitoring or other urban tree planting, and decarbonization initiatives. So there's really a wide range of opportunities to be engaged in person with local communities or even virtually through citizen science virtual campaigns.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And yes, I would, encourage reaching out to folks on LinkedIn and all that good stuff. Most people are willing to spend some time talking to you. So we won't get to all of the questions, but I do want to highlight one that came up that we get a lot, which is around cost sharing. So some of these community-focused projects may end up costing more. I know in some cases that's actually not necessarily the case, but if you all have any specific insights on how to manage that, how do you value that over cheaper PPAs or cheaper projects that don't have that community?
I'll kick off. I know that we're coming up on time. Just saying, as it relates to social license and gaining broad community support and potentially permits for local projects, what's the cost of not having those projects, right? So I think that's the other way to look at this. It's not necessarily as a premium adder, but as potentially deal killers. And so that early work and that radical listening and the stakeholder mapping and consultations that we've talked about as tactics result in healthy, de-risked projects that can then move forward into some of the other co-benefit realms, or be intentionally designed to create those benefits from the start. So oftentimes those could look like cost sharing. We'd love to have those conversations. with partners, but ultimately it's the early investments that result in the higher quality, higher impact projects.
Sure, I can just add real quick. I think I do agree that they seem higher costs because we're not appropriately accounting for the costs that we have to face down the line to mitigate the issues that rise up, right? So I think that's a problem we need to think holistically about, and I think it all actually comes down to the issue of quantification and standardization, and that's why the work that you guys are doing with the primer and a set of co-benefits and standardizing that is critical, because I do truly believe that in order to expand the pool of capital available for these projects, we need to show that this is actually something that the market recognizes as a valuable, call it premium or add-on to the projects, right? So kudos to you guys for driving that work, and we encourage all the developers and other buyers to continue to work together and with us to drive this conversation and the standardization discussion forward, because it is definitely from a buyer perspective a lot more difficult to try to compare and contrast projects that on the numbers value may not necessarily add up. So it's always great to point to an external source that's verified and respectable, and say this is actually the product that we're after, not what you see right on the paper in front of you.
And I know we're at time, but I have to plug the measurement and evaluation framework that the Just Transition Power Force constructed for this reason, really to quantify the impact of these community-oriented projects. I will also try to quickly drop the link in the chat, or Phoebe can send it out and recap. And I also have a more radical answer to that question, but for sake of time, I'll say this work really is invaluable. And it's so important to center that in our minds, right? So I'll stop there.
And I do just want to say, like, we've seen some research that indicates those costs might not be as big as you think they are on the front end, and to reiterate that you're saving costs on the back end.
Thank you all so much. I did get to drop that link in, Yinka. I want to thank each of you for sharing your wisdom and your insights on this. And thank you to everybody who joined our webinar. And thank you to those that are going to be watching this recording later. I will follow up with an email with all of the documents that we mentioned during the chat. And again, please reach out, stay in touch. If you'd like to learn more about Beyond the Megawatt, did also include our email there. And hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.